The vast hall was a testament to power. It was not built for warmth, but for impact. Light did not spill from lamps, but descended in cold, perfect columns from a ceiling lost in shadow. The air hummed, a low note felt in the bones rather than heard, the sound of machinery and authority. This was the celestial apex, the heart of the galactic empire, and today it would swallow another star-faring race. On the gleaming, mirror-like floor, a small group of humans stood. They looked fragile under the immense, arched ceiling. At their front was Kim June. He was not an old man, but his face carried a stillness that suggested he had seen many things. His dark suit was simple, a stark contrast to the shimmering robes and polished carapaces of the hundreds of alien delegates arrayed in silent tiers around them. His only companion at his immediate side was Lee Yuna. Her posture was straight, professional, but her eyes, sharp and intelligent, moved constantly. She noted the positions of the Imperial Guards, their weapons held loosely but ready. She saw the floating spheres of the galactic media, their lenses focused on them like unblinking eyes. She felt the weight of the collective gaze, a mixture of pity, curiosity, and cold satisfaction. Opposite them, upon a raised dais that seemed to grow from the floor itself, sat the Viceroy. He was a Kelthari, a species the humans had studied in desperate final weeks before their fleet's last stand. His form was humanoid but elongated, with skin not of flesh but of interlocking, pale amber crystals that caught the light and fractured it into soft rainbows. His face was long, without a visible mouth, but a cluster of glowing pinpricks of light in the area of his cheeks pulsed softly when he spoke. His voice projected directly into the minds of all present. It was a smooth, resonant voice, devoid of any emotion but serene assurance. Kim June of Terra, the Viceroy's voice echoed in their skulls. You stand in the light of the eternal empire. Your vessels are broken. Your defiance is spent. The cosmos has witnessed the inevitable outcome of resistance. June did not flinch. He simply bowed his head, a small, precise motion. It was neither deep enough to be submission, nor shallow enough to be insult. It was an acknowledgement. Yuna, following his lead, did the same. She felt a knot tighten in her stomach. The news from the front had been catastrophic. The human fleet, brave and clever, had been outmatched by Imperial technology that bent physics in ways they barely understood. The war, if it could even be called that, had lasted mere months. A different alien, smaller and covered in fine silver fur, stepped forward. This was the Herald. Its voice was a physical sound, a chirping translation of the Viceroy's telepathy. By the grace of the Eternal Sovereign, the species known as humanity is granted clemency. Total annihilation is withheld. Instead, you shall be integrated. Your planets will be administered. Your history will be archived. Your people will find purpose within the greater order. The words were a practiced recitation. Yuna had read transcripts of a dozen such ceremonies. The Grentheli, the Voss, the Silurans all had heard similar words before vanishing as independent cultures, absorbed into the Empire's efficient, homogenizing machine. She glanced at June's profile. His expression was unreadable, a placid lake. The Viceroy rose. He was terribly tall, his crystalline form scattering light across the humans as he moved. You will surrender all military assets. Your faster-than-light communication nodes will be handed over. Your colonial charters are dissolved. From this moment, the Terran system and its 6 extrasolar colonies are protectorates of the Galactic Empire. You will obey Imperial law. You will contribute to Imperial prosperity. In return, you receive peace. He extended a long, faceted hand. A complex device floated up from the dais. It was a data crystal, pulsing with a soft blue light. The instrument of integration. Your formal acceptance. This was the moment. The galactic mediaspheres drifted closer. The image of the last human diplomat signing away his species' freedom would be broadcast across 1,000 worlds. A lesson in futility. Jun looked at the crystal. He did not look at the Viceroy's hand. He seemed to be considering the object itself. The silence stretched. It was not a hesitant silence, but a heavy, deliberate one. Yuna held her breath. They had rehearsed this, but rehearsing in a small room on their captured ship was nothing like standing here, under the gaze of an empire. Finally, Jun spoke. His voice was quiet, yet it carried in the acoustically perfect hall. It was a human sound, organic and warm, against the cold telepathy and mechanical chirps. We acknowledge the current administrative reality. He chose his words like a man selecting tools. The Terran delegation is prepared to discuss the terms of this transition. A faint ripple went through the alien observers. Discuss. It was such a small, brave, pathetic word. The Viceroy's cheek lights flickered, a sign perhaps of mild surprise or amusement. There are no terms to discuss, the mental voice replied, smooth as ever. These are the conditions of your continued existence. You may accept them, or you may reject them. The latter choice has only one outcome, which my mercy has already spared you. Jun nodded slowly, as if this was a reasonable point in a difficult negotiation. Of course. Yet even an unconditional surrender has protocols. Logistics of disarmament. Civilian administration handovers. The welfare of our people during this. Integration. He paused. We have prepared a document. A list of considerations for the efficiency of the process. To smooth the path for your administrators. He gestured to Yuna. She stepped forward, a small data slate in her hand. It was a humble thing, a simple human device. An Imperial guard, a hulking being with thick gray hide, stepped in her path. The Viceroy gave an almost imperceptible signal. The guard moved aside. Yuna approached the dais, placed the slate on the first step, and retreated back to Jun's side. The Viceroy did not look at it. A minor functionary, a humanoid with quick nervous movements, scurried from the side, retrieved the slate, and vanished with it into a background alcove. His name was Park Chul. He was a low-level bureaucrat, a specialist in processing incoming documentation from client species. His job was to categorize, file, and mostly to discard. He glanced at the slate's header, Terran Article of Conditional Surrender and Transitional Protocol for Imperial Review. He suppressed a sigh. Conditional. They all tried that at first. Hope was the last thing to die. He tagged it with a low-priority code and slid it into the intake queue of the Imperial Legal Database. It would be processed, eventually, likely automatically rejected for non-compliance with standard annexation formats. It was not his concern. The ceremony was the real event. On the dais, the Viceroy's lights pulsed. Your considerations will be reviewed in accordance with standard procedure. Now the instrument. Kim Jun looked from the floating data crystal back to the Viceroy's luminous, expressionless face. He saw no malice there, nor kindness, only the absolute certainty of a force of nature. A glacier did not hate the rock it ground to dust. It simply was. Slowly, deliberately, Jun reached out. He did not take the crystal. Instead, he produced a simple stylus from his pocket. He reached towards the device that held the crystal. A small projected screen appeared, waiting for his signature. The Galaxy watched. His stylus hovered over the light, and then he lowered it without making a mark. He placed the stylus back in his pocket. I must, with all respect, await the formal review of our submitted document before finalizing any instrument, Jun said, his tone utterly polite. It is a matter of procedural integrity. For the record, the silence this time was shocked. A refusal? At this final second? The Viceroy went perfectly still. The hall seemed to grow colder. Yuna's blood ran cold. This was not in the rehearsal dot. After a lifetime of seconds, the Viceroy's voice returned, colder now, the psychic tone like frost forming on glass. Your defiance is meaningless. Your document is irrelevant. Your signature is a formality that changes nothing. Sign. The order was absolute. The guards subtly adjusted their grips on their weapons. Kim Jun met the Viceroy's gaze where his eyes might have been. He saw the implacable power, the impatience, the utter disregard for human concepts like procedure or record. He saw an empire that was so vast, so sure of its victory, that it could not even conceive of looking at a piece of paper offered by its prey. A very small, almost invisible smile touched Jun's lips. It was not a smile of joy or triumph. It was the smile of a man who has just seen his opponent step exactly where he hoped they would, without even realizing there was a trap. As you wish, Jun said softly, his voice almost lost in the vastness of the hall. He reached for the stylus again. For the record. The cold, polished silence of the celestial apex was replaced by the sterile hum of a transit corridor. Kim Jun and Lee Yuna were escorted not by guards, but by a pair of silent, floating orbs that pulsed with a soft yellow light. They were guides, or perhaps polite jailers. The message was clear. They were not prisoners, but they were not free. They were assets in transit. They were led to a sector of the administrative sprawl that surrounded the apex. Their new quarters were not a cell, but they felt like one. The room was large, clean, and utterly impersonal. The walls were a soft gray, the furniture sleek and formed from a single unbroken piece of some resilient material. A wide window looked out not upon a city, but upon a breathtaking vista of stars and the gas giant the imperial capital orbited. It was a magnificent view, meant to inspire awe and a sense of smallness. Yuna looked at it and felt only a deep, hollow loneliness. They didn't even look at it, she said, her voice tight. She stood by the window, her arms crossed. That bureaucrat, Park Chul, he just took the slate and walked off. He looked bored. Jun was seated at the room's only table, his hands resting palms down on its cool surface. He was, Jun replied, his voice calm. He sees 100 documents like that every week. Pleas, petitions, last-minute appeals. To him, it was just more noise from a defeated species. He was following procedure. Procedure, Yuna repeated, the word tasting bitter. Their procedure is to ignore us until we fade away. She turned to face him. Jun, they have our fleet. Our commanders are in holding facilities. Colonial governors are reporting imperial administrators landing on their capitals. This document of ours, it's floating in some database. It's a piece of digital dust. It is exactly where it needs to be, Jun said. He finally looked up at her. His calm was not effortless. She could see the fatigue around his eyes, the weight he carried. But his focus was absolute. The Empire works on procedure. It is a machine. We have placed a single specific grain of sand into its gears. They will not notice it until the machine jams. And if they just delete it? If this Park Chul simply marks it rejected and erases it? He won't, Jun said. He is a low-level functionary. His purpose is to process, not to decide. Deleting an official submission from a signatory species, even a defeated one, would be a decision. He will file it. It will be tagged, logged, and forgotten. That is the system. And that is what we require. Yuna sighed, walking over to sit opposite him. So now we wait. In this very comfortable box. Now, Jun corrected gently, we are observed. They will test our compliance. They will offer small dignities to see if we grasp for them. They will watch for any sign of continued resistance. Our role is to be perfectly, boringly cooperative. We are tired diplomats who have lost. We are concerned only with the minor details of our people's soft landing into oblivion. He was right. Within hours, a communication arrived. It was not from the Viceroy, but from a mid-level Imperial coordinator named Aaron. The meeting was scheduled for the next cycle. The subject: post-integration civilian welfare parameters. It was exactly the kind of dry, administrative meeting June had predicted. The meeting room was smaller, designed for practical work. Aran was a bipedal species with smooth, gray skin and large, dark eyes. She was efficient, polite, and completely devoid of empathy. She recited regulations about calorie distribution, permissible public gatherings, and re-education curriculum modules. June listened, nodded, and asked careful, technical questions. He inquired about medical supply chains. He asked about the procedure for families separated by the new colonial zoning. He requested clarification on the rights of human workers under imperial labor codes. His questions were those of a man trying to minimize suffering, not change the outcome. Yuna, playing the diligent aide, took copious notes on a fresh data slate, her face a mask of professional concern. Aaron answered in monotone, citing code subsections. At one point, she paused. Your queries are noted. However, you must understand that the Terran concept of rights is now subsumed by imperial privileges, which are granted based on contribution and behavior. Your focus should be on guiding your people toward productive compliance. Of course, June said, bowing his head slightly. We are merely seeking to understand the system, so we may help our people adapt. Aaron seemed satisfied. The meeting concluded. As they were led back to their quarters, Yuna whispered, "She thinks we've given up. She thinks we're just managing the decline." "Good," June murmured back. "Let them think it." Meanwhile, in a different part of the administrative complex, Park Chul was having a very ordinary day. He sat in a cubicle surrounded by glowing data streams. The human's data slate had been processed. His AI assistant had scanned the document. It had flagged the title, Terran Article of Conditional Surrender, for non-standard formatting. The AI had also detected the embedded subclauses written in dense, legalistic language. It had performed a routine cross-reference. The cross-reference had pinged a match. A very old, very foundational piece of imperial law, the doctrine of unilateral contractual validation, often called the Fine Print Statute. It was a law established millennia ago to prevent powerful species from tricking primitive ones with hidden clauses. It stated that any governing body that enforced a treaty without conducting a full review of all submitted related documents by the other party automatically validated any secondary terms proposed within those documents. Provided they operated within the existing legal framework, the Empire used this law to legitimize its own complex treaties. It was a cornerstone of their legal pride. Park Chul's I saw the match and classified it as a non-actionable anomaly. The document was, after all, submitted by a species that had surrendered unconditionally. The conditional part was clearly a desperate fiction. The AI assigned a probability score, 0.03% chance of relevant legal standing. Standard procedure for such a low probability flag was to file it in the deep archive and generate a notification for a mid-level legal reviewer. To be actioned within 60 standard cycles. Park Chul approved the AI's recommendation with a tap of his finger. The document was sealed into the Imperial Archive, a digital tomb. A small notification popped up on the workload queue of a legal reviewer named Kale, who was currently on vacation. It would wait for him. Park Chul thought nothing more of it. He moved on to the next item, a dispute about mining quotas from the Grenthilly sector. Real work. Back in their quarters, June received a message. It was a simple, text-only update, routed through the open civilian network the Empire allowed for basic communication. It was from a man named Choi Min, a logistics officer now held in a detention barracks on a human colony world. The message was brief, coded in a shipping inventory syntax they had prearranged. Package archived. Delivery receipt pending. No inspection. Yuna read it over his shoulder. Archived? She breathed. They filed it. June leaned back in his chair, staring at the magnificent impersonal stars. The grain of sand is in the gear, he said quietly. Now we wait for the machine to turn. 7 standard cycles passed. They were days of quiet, tense routine. Kim June and Lee Yuna were moved to slightly more comfortable quarters, a sign, perhaps, that they were behaving correctly. They met with Coordinator Aaron twice more, discussing the minutiae of human cultural practices that might be modified for better Imperial integration. June remained the picture of weary cooperation. He asked questions about educational reforms, about the preservation of historical artifacts. His requests were always small, always framed as a desire to help the Empire assimilate humanity more smoothly. Yuna played her part, but inside she felt a storm of frustration. They were discussing the color of their own prison walls, while the foundation of their world had been stolen. Every night, she scanned the limited news feeds they were allowed. She saw images of Imperial ships in orbit around Earth. She saw reports of human workers being assigned to Imperial projects. The absorption was proceeding exactly on schedule. Then, the summons came. It was not from Iran. It was a formal command, engraved on a crystal slab, delivered by a silent armored guard. The Viceroy required their presence in the Hall of Final Accord. The annexation was to be formalized with a public signing. The ceremony, they were told, would be broadcast live across the core worlds. It was to be the final, beautiful closure to the Terran campaign. The Hall of Final Accord was smaller than the Celestial Apex, but more intimidating in its precision. It was circular, with walls of dark, polished stone that seemed to drink the light. In the center of the room was a single, ornate table made of a shimmering black material. Above it, holographic projectors lay dormant. Around the perimeter, in silent tiers, were the representatives of the Empire's major species and ministries. The air was thick with a sense of solemn finality. The Viceroy stood beside the table. He was even more imposing here, a figure of crystalline authority against the dark backdrop. Arrayed behind him were high-ranking military officers and Imperial advisors, their faces unreadable. The media orbs hovered at a respectful distance, their lenses focused on the empty space where the humans would stand. June and Yuna were led in. They wore the same simple clothes as before. They looked terribly ordinary in the grandeur of the hall. Yuna's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it, the final act. She glanced at June. His face was calm, but she saw a new tightness in his jaw, a focused glint in his eye. The placid lake had developed a current. The Viceroy's telepathic voice filled the room, smooth and magnanimous. Kim June, Lee Yuna, you return under a brighter sky. The period of reflection is over. The Empire has been generous. Your people are settling into their new roles. Peace reigns where there was chaos. Today, we make that peace eternal. A section of the black table shimmered. A complex, three-dimensional document appeared above it, written in flowing Imperial script. It was the official instrument of annexation. It listed the human worlds, their resources, their populations as Imperial property. The terms were absolute. At the bottom glowed 2 signature fields, one for the Viceroy, representing the eternal sovereign, and one for the representative of Terra. The instrument is prepared, the Viceroy intoned. He made a slight gesture with one faceted hand. His own signature, A unique pattern of light already blazed in the first field. The document waited, expectant, for the human marked dot and attendant. A different functionary from Park Chol stepped forward. He held a stylus on a velvet cushion. It was not a simple tool. It was an ornate device that would scan June's biological signature and bind it irrevocably to the document under galactic law. Take the stylus. The Viceroy's voice echoed in their minds. Add your signature. Fulfill your duty to your people and secure their place in the eternal order. All eyes were on June. The media sphere zeroed in on his hand. The history of humanity was balanced on this single quiet moment. June looked at the stylus. He looked at the glowing document, its harsh terms hanging in the air. He did not move. The silence stretched. It was no longer solemn. It was becoming uncomfortable. The Viceroy's cheek lights pulsed a steady, rhythmic blue. Him June, the mental voice came again, a hint of frost forming on the edges. The instrument awaits. June slowly raised his eyes from the document to meet the Viceroy's luminous gaze. He did not look at the stylus. He did not reach for it. Your Eminence, June said. His voice was not loud, but in the dead quiet, it was as clear as shattered glass. The Galactic Empire has achieved a great victory. Your military might is unmatched. Your control is total. He paused, letting the complimentary words hang in the air. But you have made one critical error. A ripple of sheer astonishment went through the assembled delegates. A murmur, a shifting of weight. Did the human just say error? Una felt a bolt of pure adrenaline shoot through her. This was the precipice. The Viceroy went perfectly still. The playful frost in his voice hardened into permafrost. An error? You speak of errors from a position of nothing. Explain this triviality. June took a small, deliberate step forward. He was no longer a supplicant. He was a man stating a fact. Not a triviality, Your Eminence. A rule. The first and oldest rule of human diplomacy. He paused again, his eyes locking with the Viceroy's featureless face. The entire galaxy, watching through the media, leaned in. You forgot rule number 1. He let the silence build until it was almost unbearable. In that silence, the confidence of the Empire wavered, just for a microsecond, replaced by bafflement. Which is? The Viceroy's voice crackled in their minds. Cold and dangerous June offered a small, tight smile that held no warmth. Never sign a human treaty, he said, each word dropping like a stone, without reading the fine print. For a long moment, there was only confusion. Then, a wave of derisive sound filled the hall. Chuckles from the military officers. Scornful clicks and whistles from the delegates. The tension broke into open ridicule. Fine print? The pathetic creature was talking about fine print? It was the last sad gasp of a defeated mind, trying to cling to some imagined technicality. The Viceroy's lights flickered through a spectrum of colors amusement. Annoyance, contempt. You waste the time of this gathering with a primitive jest? The psychic voice boomed. Your fine print is irrelevant. Your laws are dust. Only imperial law is real. June did not react to the laughter. His calm was unnerving. He simply nodded, as if the Viceroy had made a reasonable point. Of course. Imperial law is paramount. We would never suggest otherwise. He turned his head slightly toward Una. Aide Una, please display the document we submitted for review upon our arrival. Submission log number 44,781. Terra. Una's fingers flew across her data slate. Her heart was a drum, but her hands were steady. This was the moment. She sent the command. Above the black table, next to the glowing instrument of annexation, a second document flickered to life. It was the Terran article of conditional surrender and transitional protocol. It looked humble next to the imperial masterpiece. The delegates' laughter faded into curious silence. This, June said, gesturing to the text, was submitted and officially received by Imperial bureaucrat Park Chul 7 cycles ago, as per your own procedural code. It was filed in the Imperial Legal Archive under the stated log number. He pointed to a specific densely worded clause, which Yuna helpfully highlighted in soft red light. This is the fine print, Your Eminence. Have you read it? The Viceroy stared. He had not. No one had. It was a document from a conquered species. Why would he? The hall was utterly silent now. The mockery was gone, replaced by a dawning, unsettling curiosity. The grain of sand, long forgotten, was now the only thing in the room anyone could see. The silence in the hall of final accord was no longer polite. It was shocked and brittle. All eyes were fixed on the 2 glowing documents hanging side by side. On one side, a majestic instrument of annexation, a masterpiece of imperial declaration. On the other, the humble, text-heavy human submission, with a single clause pulsing a soft, accusing red. The Viceroy's crystalline form seemed to harden. The playful lights on his cheeks were now a steady, cold blue. He did not look at the human document. He looked at Kim June. You read this irrelevant text to me, his voice commanded, echoing with a force that made several delegates flinch. June's expression remained one of polite deference, but his posture was unyielding. With respect, Your Eminence, it is not irrelevant. It is the foundational document of our surrender. Submitted prior to this ceremony, as required by your own procedural code. Section 45, subparagraph 12, regarding the good faith disclosure from a treaty party. He was quoting their own law. The murmurs started again, but this time they were whispers of confusion. Not ridicule. The clause, June continued, his voice clear and steady, invokes the imperial doctrine of unilateral contractual validation. The fine print statute, established in the reign of the 3rd eternal sovereign, case reference 8891 Shia, a wave of utter disbelief washed through the imperial delegates. They knew that law. It was an ancient, proud law. It was designed to prove the empire's fairness, to show that even the mighty followed rules that prevented trickery. It was never, ever supposed to be used against them. Preposterous. The outburst came from one of the Viceroy's advisors, a being with feathered crests that now stood erect in anger. That statute protects primitive species from hidden terms in our treaties. It does not apply to the desperate scrawlings of a defeated foe. June nodded, as if he had expected this. The statute has no exception for the status of the submitting party. It applies to any governing body and any submitted related documents. Our document was submitted. It was received. It was logged. He turned his gaze back to the Viceroy. You chose to proceed to final annexation without a full legal review of our submitted terms. You enforced the primary condition, our surrender, while ignoring the secondary framework we proposed. By the letter of your own unbreakable law, this triggers the validation of our secondary terms. And what are these? Terms? The Viceroy's voice was a low, dangerous hum. The room grew colder. June took a small breath. This was it. The Terran article states that should the Galactic Empire move to formally annex human space without a line-by-line negotiation and mutual ratification of this specific document, then the act of annexation is hereby rendered null in its unilateral form. Instead, it activates a conditional integration. He paused, letting the legalistic words sink in. No one breathed. The condition, June said, his voice dropping to a near whisper that somehow carried further than a shout, is that humanity is granted immediate and permanent governing authority, with full voting rights and territorial autonomy over all its settled worlds. within the political structure of the galactic empire. In short, you do not annex us. We join you as a pure political entity with a seat on your high council. For a moment, there was no sound at all. Then the hall erupted. It was chaos. Delegates shot to their feet, shouting, clicking, buzzing in outrage. Military officers looked at each other in confusion. The media spheres whirled frantically, trying to capture every angle of the unprecedented scene. The Viceroy simply stood, a statue of furious amber light. Silence. The command was not telepathic. It was a screech from the feathered advisor. The noise died down to a horrified simmer. The Viceroy finally moved. He stepped toward the holograms. He seemed to study the red highlighted claws. His mind reached out, not to the room, but to the Imperial legal network. He was querying the archive himself. The confirmation was instant, and it was public. A neutral, synthetic voice issued from the walls. The voice of the Empire's own legal AI. Query. Status of submission. 44,781 tera. Result. Received and archived. Status. Unreviewed by assigned legal authority. Cross-reference. Contains embedded invocation of Doctrine 8891XA. Procedural note. Annexation ceremony proceeds without doctrinal review. Conclusion. Statute trigger conditions are met. The synthetic voice hung on the final word. Met. The word was a detonation in the silent hall. This is a trick, roared a grizzled military commander, his carapace clicking in rage. A human trick. We will not be bound by the twisted words of animals. June turned to the commander. His calm was now terrifying. Is the Galactic Empire's law a trick? He asked, his voice quiet. Is the foundation of your own justice a twisted word? You imposed this law on the Grentheli to legitimize your trade accords. You used it to validate the Voss mineral treaties. The law exists to prove your fairness. Do you now discard it because it is inconvenient? He had them. He had them completely. To deny the human claim, they would have to publicly renounce one of their own core legal principles, pillar of their moral authority over 100 species. It would unravel the legitimacy of 1,000 other treaties. It would show the galaxy that imperial law only applied when it served the Empire. The Viceroy looked from June to the stunned faces of his own court, to the hovering media spheres, broadcasting this catastrophe to the core worlds. He saw not just a human diplomat, but a mirror held up to the hypocrisy of his own system. The humans hadn't brought a hidden weapon. They hadn't launched a rebellion. They had simply used the Empire's own favorite tool, the unbreakable, bureaucratic rule, and turned it into a scalpel. His voice, when it came, was stripped of all its grandeur. It was flat, cold, and filled with a hatred so profound it was almost palpable. You planned this. From the moment your fleet fell. June met his gaze. We read the rules, he said simply. We believed you when you said they were eternal. It seems we were the only ones who took that seriously. The Viceroy's faceted hand clenched. For a second, Una was sure he would order them vaporized on the spot. But he couldn't. The media was watching. The law, his own monstrous, inflexible law, was watching. The grain of sand had jammed the machine utterly. He turned away from June, as if the human was now beneath his sight. He addressed the frozen room, his telepathy dripping with venom. This anomaly will be reviewed by the High Juridical Council. The ceremony is suspended. But it was too late. The word met was already echoing across the galaxy. The human, with his piece of paper, had not just refused to sign. He had just torn up their victory and handed them back the pieces, wrapped in their own legal parchment. The storm did not end in the Hall of Final Accord. It merely moved. The silent, dignified corridors of the Imperial Administrative Complex became a hive of muted panic. Kim Jun and Li Yuna were not escorted back to their quarters by polite guide orbs. This time, a full detail of stony-faced Imperial guards, their weapons now prominently displayed, marched them to a secure suite deep within the government spire. It was nicer than the last one, a sign of their sudden, bewildering new status. They were no longer defeated foes. They were a legal crisis with a heartbeat. Inside, the silence was heavy. Yuna let out a long, shaky breath, her professional mask finally cracking. "They could still kill us," she whispered, staring at the door. A quiet accident. A malfunctioning air scrubber. June stood by the window, watching the orderly streams of traffic in the sky. The gas giant hung in its eternal, beautiful placidity. "They could have killed us in the hall," he said, his voice tired but firm. "But they didn't. The moment their legal AI confirmed the trigger, this ceased to be a military problem. It became a political and judicial one. Killing us now would be an admission that their system is a lie. They cannot afford that. Their power is built on the idea that their rules are absolute." He was right, but it was a fragile truth. Over the next several cycles, their isolation was complete. No messages came in or out. The news feeds in their suite were cut off. They were left in a vacuum, with only their own thoughts and the terrifying uncertainty of what they had unleashed. Out there, beyond their silent room, the Galactic Empire was convulsing. The High Juridical Council, a body of the Empire's most venerable and ancient legal minds, was summoned in emergency session. The broadcast of the ceremony had been seen by too many to be suppressed. On 100 worlds, from the bustling markets of the core to the mining colonies on the rim, beings were talking. They were replaying the moment the human quoted their own law. They were watching the Viceroy's stunned silence. The story wasn't about human defiance. It was about imperial fallibility. The Council's review was not a trial. It was a brutal, internal autopsy. They examined submission 44,781 Terra. They ran the language through every interpretive AI. They dissected the fine print statute for any possible loophole. There were none. The humans had written their clause with the cold precision of master surgeons, using the Empire's own legal definitions as a scalpel. To reject, it would be to declare the statute void, invalidating a cornerstone of galactic commerce and governance for millennia. The economic and political chaos would be unimaginable. The decision, when it came, was not delivered with a ceremony. A simple, official data slate was brought to June and Yuna's suite by a gray-faced bureaucrat who refused to meet their eyes. It was a ruling from the High Juridical Council. It was one paragraph long. It stated that, pursuant to Doctrine 8891XA, the secondary terms of the Terran Article of Conditional Surrender were provisionally recognized as valid, pending a full constitutional convention. Effective immediately, the human-settled worlds were designated a protectorate with autonomous governance status, and a human representative was granted a provisional seat on the Imperial High Council. With full voting rights on matters pertaining to human space and non-military galactic policy, they had done it. They had turned unconditional surrender into a negotiated membership. Yuna read the words 3 times, her hands trembling. It's real." June did not smile. He simply closed his eyes for a long moment, absorbing the weight of it. The relief was there, but it was overshadowed by a greater burden. They had not won freedom. They had won a place at the table of their captors. It was a poisoned chalice, but it was one they could now drink from, instead of having it forced down their throats. Their first official function as counselor-designate was not a celebration. It was a meeting in a small, plain chamber. Sitting across from them was not the Viceroy, but a new Imperial liaison, a tired-looking official named Garan. The Viceroy, They were told had been recalled for consultations. Garan's voice was devoid of emotion. Your provisional seat is recognized. Administrative control of your worlds will be transitioned back to your appointed governors within the next standard cycle. Your civilian populations will be removed from mandatory labor quotas. Your military personnel will be released. He slid another slate across the table. These are the dossiers of the other client species representatives on the council. The Grenfeli, the Voss, the Silurans. Their votes are typically coordinated by the Imperial Ministry. June picked up the slate but didn't look at it. He looked at Garan. Thank you. Our first request is to schedule introductory meetings with each of them, separately. Garan's brow furrowed. For what purpose? Now a small, genuine smile touched June's lips. It was not warm. It was the smile of a player who has just been dealt a new hand. To discuss the rules, of course, he said, now that we all have to follow them. The meaning hung in the air. The Empire had believed victory was about firepower and surrender documents. For humanity, it had always been about the framework. They had just proven that the Empire's own framework could be used as a shield, and perhaps one day, as a lever dot as they were finally led from the administrative spire, not as prisoners. Not as supplicants, but as reluctant counselors, they passed through a public gallery. Alien beings of a dozen species stopped and stared. The looks were no longer pitying or scornful. They were curious. Some held a faint, dangerous glimmer of something else. Hope. Yuna walked beside June, her head high. She thought of the human worlds, waking up to news they would not believe. She thought of the other species on the council, who for centuries had only known subjugation. What now? She asked softly as they stepped into a transport that was theirs to command. June gazed out at the sprawling imperial capital, a monument to power built on the idea of immutable order. He had just proven that order could be bent. No, he said, his voice quiet but clear in the humming silence of the vehicle. We learn the rules better than anyone else. And we remind the galaxy that they apply to everyone, even to an empire. The transport lifted off, carrying them not toward a cell, but into the complex, treacherous, and newly uncertain politics of a galaxy that had just watched a giant stumble over a single, carefully placed word.